I still see their eyes in my dreams, yellow-green orbs floating on the water's surface, watching me with ancient, calculating patience. The crocodiles of Lake Turkana don't rush, they wait, and on that scorching afternoon in northern Kenya, as I waded into the murky shallows to bless the waters for the village baptism ceremony, I had no idea I was being hunted. The first attack came without warning. A massive shadow erupted from beneath the surface, jaws snapping at my leg with such force that the sound echoed across the lake. I stumbled backward, losing my footing on the slippery bank. My white clerical collar, a beacon of hope to the gathered villagers, was now stained with mud and blood as I fell. Then I saw them, not one, but 3 massive Nile crocodiles circling, cutting off my path to shore. The screams from the shoreline blended with my own prayers as I faced what I was certain would be my final moments on earth. That's when the water began to glow. I was born in Dublin, Ireland, on a rainy Tuesday that my mother always said was too ordinary a day for such an extraordinary child. Perhaps she knew something I didn't, for my path to Kenya's remote villages had been anything but ordinary. My name is Father Michael O'Malley, and until that day at Lake Turkana, I had been a man of faith who had never truly been tested. Growing up, I was the quiet boy on Grafton Street who preferred books to football. My father, a carpenter with hands rough as tree bark, would watch me read with a mixture of pride and confusion. "Books won't build you a home, Mickey," he'd say. But there was never malice in his words, just concern. What he couldn't understand was that I wasn't looking for a physical home. I was searching for something deeper. I found that something at St. Patrick's Seminary at the age of 18. The stone walls and centuries of tradition spoke to me in ways my father's workshop never could. I excelled in my studies, particularly in languages, which would later prove to be God's way of preparing me for my true calling. But seminary life was safe, predictable. I spent 10 years in Dublin, then another 5 in Rome, surrounded by ancient texts and theological debates. My faith was intellectual, untested by the harsh realities that would later define it. The call to missionary work came unexpectedly, like most divine interventions do. I was 33, the age of Christ at his crucifixion, when a visiting bishop from East Africa spoke at our diocese about the desperate need for priests in remote regions. Something stirred in me that night. Not just compassion or duty, but something deeper that I couldn't articulate. I volunteered the next morning. My superiors were surprised. "Father Michael," the archbishop said, eyebrows raised, "you've been on a path to academic theology. Kenya is different." His concern was valid. I had never left Europe, had never experienced true poverty or hardship. My hands were soft, unmarked by labor, more suited to turning pages than building churches in the wilderness. "I feel called," was all I could say. It wasn't a particularly eloquent response from someone who had written a 200-page thesis on Augustinian philosophy, but it was honest. 6 weeks later, I landed at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport in Nairobi with 2 suitcases, a breviary, and absolutely no idea what awaited me. The heat hit me first, oppressive and thick, followed by the kaleidoscope of colors, sounds, and scents that make up Kenya's capital. I was assigned to spend 1 month at the Archdiocese of Nairobi for orientation before heading north to Turkana County, one of the most remote and challenging regions of Kenya. "You'll be responsible for 12 villages spread across 200 kilometers, Father Josephat," my Kenyan mentor explained as we drove through Nairobi's chaotic traffic. "Some can only be reached by foot or on the back of a motorbike. The people speak Turkana, Swahili, and some English. They face drought, hunger, disease, and occasional tribal conflicts. And you," he glanced at me with a knowing smile, "will be their spiritual guide." I swallowed hard, wondering if God had made a terrible mistake. I was a scholar, not an adventurer. I could debate the finer points of transubstantiation but knew nothing about surviving in the bush or mediating tribal disputes. My first 6 months in Turkana were a humbling education. I learned to ride a motorbike across terrain that would terrify professional off-road drivers. I experienced thirst that cracked my lips and turned my prayers into desperate whispers. I treated wounds, blessed newborns, buried the dead, and slowly, painfully, learned the local language through countless mistakes that made children giggle and elders smile patiently. My parish, if one could call it that, consisted of a small concrete church in the main village of Kalokol and 11 outstations, simple structures of sticks, mud, and corrugated metal scattered across the arid landscape. Lake Turkana, known locally as the Jade Sea for its turquoise waters, provided both life and danger to the communities around it. The lake gave fish, water, and transportation, but it also harbored some of Africa's largest populations of Nile crocodiles. "Never approach the water alone," warned Akiru, a local fisherman who had become my friend and guide. "The crocodiles here don't fear humans. They see us as food." His left arm ended at the elbow, a permanent reminder of the lake's dangers. But despite the harsh conditions, I found a joy in Turkana that had eluded me in the comfortable libraries of Europe. My faith, once an intellectual exercise, became a lived reality. When you pray for rain alongside farmers whose children will starve without it, when you hold the hand of a mother who has just lost her third child to malaria, faith becomes something tangible, something necessary for survival. By my second year, I had settled into a rhythm of life that would have been unimaginable to the bookish boy from Dublin. My skin had darkened under the equatorial sun, my hands had hardened, and I had learned to speak Turkana with enough fluency that the elders no longer needed to switch to broken English for my benefit. I had also developed a deep devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, perhaps because my own mother was so far away, or perhaps because Mary's quiet strength seemed especially relevant in a place where women carried so much of life's burden. The incident at Lake Turkana happened during my third year. I had been preparing a group of 37 villagers for baptism, a mixture of children and adults who had embraced the faith with an enthusiasm that humbled me. In Turkana tradition, water is precious, sacred. Baptism, therefore, wasn't just a religious ceremony but a profound cultural statement. After much discussion with the elders and church leaders, we had decided to perform the baptism in Lake Turkana itself, rather than using a small basin in the church. "It will connect our old ways with the new faith," explained Elder Akai, whose wisdom I had come to deeply respect. "Our people have always seen the lake as a place of both life and death. It is fitting that your God's water ritual happens there." The baptism was scheduled for a Sunday in October. The dry season was ending and the lake's waters had receded, creating shallow pools along certain protected areas of the shoreline. The village had spent weeks preparing, creating new white garments, planning a feast, rehearsing songs that blended traditional Turkana melodies with Christian lyrics. It was to be a momentous occasion, and my heart swelled with pride at how far we had all come together. On the morning of the baptism, I woke before dawn to pray. The day promised to be scorching, even by Turkana standards, so we had agreed to begin the ceremony early. I knelt on the dirt floor of my small dwelling, fingers running over the worn wooden rosary beads that had belonged to my grandmother. "Blessed Mother," I prayed, "guide us today as your son's family grows in this place so far from where you walked on earth." Looking back, I wonder if that prayer was somehow prophetic. By 7 in the morning, we had gathered at the designated spot on Lake Turkana's western shore. A natural inlet created a shallow pool, separated from the deeper lake by a sandbar. Local fishermen had inspected the area the previous day and assured me it was safe. The water was clear enough to see the bottom, and the inlet was temporarily cut off from the main lake where crocodiles typically hunted. The ceremony began beautifully. The catechumens stood in a line along the shore, dressed in white, their faces solemn yet joyful. The village choir sang in harmonies that made my Irish heart ache with their beauty. I wore my finest vestments, not that I had many, and carried a silver cross that the community had saved for months to purchase from Nairobi. As was my custom before the baptism, I waded into the water first to bless it, making the sign of the cross over the surface while reciting the prayer of blessing. The water reached my knees, cool against the already mounting heat of the day. I remember thinking how perfect everything was, how far we had all come, how blessed I was to be part of this community's journey of faith. That's when I felt it. A change in pressure beneath my feet, a subtle shift in the sand. Later, the fishermen would explain that the previous night's winds had partially eroded the sandbar, creating an underwater channel deep enough for crocodiles to slip through undetected. The first crocodile struck with terrifying precision. One moment I was raising the silver cross, the next I was thrown off balance as jaws clamped around my calf. The pain was secondary to the shock, a primal terror that transcended language or thought. I fell backward into the water, the precious cross flying from my grasp. The shoreline erupted in screams. "Ngibolo kinit! Crocodiles!" The warning came too late. I struggled to my feet, water dripping from my vestments now stained red. The crocodile had retreated, perhaps surprised by my size or the taste of my foreign flesh, but that retreat was temporary. As I tried to make my way back to shore, I saw them, 3 large shapes gliding just beneath the surface, cutting off my path to safety. 20 years of theological education offered no practical solution to being trapped in crocodile-infested waters. My mind raced through prayers, Bible verses, seminary lessons. Nothing addressed this particular scenario. The villagers were shouting, some running for spears, others calling my name. But I knew help would come too late. The largest crocodile, a monster that must have been at least 5 meters long, began moving directly toward me. In that moment, facing what I was certain was my death, I did the only thing I could think of. I began to pray the Hail Mary, not in English or Latin as I had learned in seminary, but in Turkana, the language that had become a part of my soul. Alakara Maria. Ibukor Akian. The words came automatically as the massive predator closed the distance between us. I could see its eyes now, ancient, emotionless, fixed on me with terrible purpose. The water around my bleeding leg turned pink, creating a scent trail that would only attract more attention. Kotar iyong akalorukinit, 5 meters away. I could see the ridges on its scaled back breaking the water's surface. Jesus akasuban kun, 3 meters. Its head began to rise from the water, jaws slightly open. Alakara Maria totoma kasubanok, 1 meter. I closed my eyes, the prayer continuing on my lips as I awaited the inevitable impact. But it never came. Instead, I felt a change in the air, a shift in temperature and pressure that made the hairs on my arms stand up despite the water. When I opened my eyes, the world had transformed. The water around me was glowing with a soft blue light that seemed to emanate from below rather than above. The advancing crocodile had stopped, its prehistoric eyes now showing something I never thought possible in such a creature. Confusion, perhaps even fear. The light intensified, taking shape within the water. At first I thought it was a trick of the sun or my own terror-stricken mind creating hallucinations, but then the light coalesced into a form I recognized instantly, though I had never seen it manifested in such a way. The silhouette of a woman, robed and crowned, her hands outstretched toward the creatures that threatened me. The Virgin Mary, not as a European painting had depicted her, but with the dark complexion of the people I served. She stood on the water between me and the crocodiles, her presence both substantial and ethereal. No words were spoken, but a sense of peace washed over me that defied the mortal danger surrounding us. The largest crocodile, the one that had been seconds away from attacking, slowly backed away, its eyes never leaving the glowing figure. The other 2 followed suit, retreating into the deeper water beyond the inlet. Within moments they had disappeared completely. The luminous figure turned toward me. Her face held an expression of such tender compassion that tears sprang to my eyes. She smiled, a mother's smile that transcended culture, language, and even dimension. And then, gradually, the light began to fade. As the last of the blue glow dissipated into the waters of Lake Turkana, I felt a final sensation, a cool touch on my injured leg. When I looked down, the bleeding had stopped. The wound was still there. I would always carry the scar, but the flesh had begun to close before my eyes. Not a complete healing, but enough that I could make my way back to shore without leaving a blood trail for the crocodiles to follow. The shoreline had fallen silent. Every person, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, stood motionless, eyes wide with wonder. Later I would learn that they had seen it too. All of it. The approaching crocodiles, the mysterious light, the figure in the water. Each would describe it slightly differently. Some saw her as similar to the holy cards I had distributed in catechism classes. Others saw her with features resembling Turkana women. But all agreed on one thing. The Mother of God had come to Lake Turkana. I managed to wade back to shore where many hands reached out to help me. Elder Ikai, a man who had been skeptical of many Christian teachings despite his respect for me, fell to his knees as I passed. "The Mother of your God is also our mother," he said, his weathered face wet with tears. "Today, she has claimed the Turkana people as her children." The planned baptism ceremony took on a new dimension. After my wound was wrapped by the village healer, who worked while muttering prayers to both ancestral spirits and the Virgin Mary in fascinating theological fusion, I insisted on continuing with the baptisms. Each catechumen entered the water with new reverence, understanding that they were being baptized in waters that had been sanctified by divine presence. No one feared the crocodile's return. Somehow we all knew they would not come back that day. News of what happened at Lake Turkana spread across the region with astonishing speed. In a land without reliable phone service or internet, the story traveled along ancient communication networks, from village to village, market to market. Within days, people began arriving from distant communities to see the place where Mama Maria had appeared. They came seeking healing, blessing, answers to prayers. A spontaneous shrine appeared on the shoreline, a simple arrangement of stones surrounding a wooden carving of Mary that a local artist had created based on descriptions of the apparition. My bishop in Nairobi was initially cautious when I reported the event. The church has strict protocols for investigating alleged miracles and apparitions. A delegation was sent to interview witnesses and examine the site. I spent hours recounting every detail to skeptical priests and one particularly stern nun with a background in psychology who seemed determined to find a natural explanation for mass hallucination, but the evidence was difficult to dismiss. 37 baptismal candidates and 64 witnesses had seen the same phenomenon. My leg wound had healed at an inexplicable rate. Most compelling of all, the crocodile attacks in that section of Lake Turkana, which had claimed 6 lives in the previous year alone, ceased completely after that day. Fishermen reported that the massive reptiles still inhabited the lake but now avoided the inlet where the apparition had occurred. As for me, the experience transformed my priesthood in ways I'm still understanding years later. The academic faith of my European training merged with the lived, tangible faith of Turkana. I no longer saw myself as bringing God to Africa. Rather, I had encountered God in Africa in a way that would have been impossible in the comfortable parishes of Dublin. 3 years after the incident, the local bishop officially recognized the site as a place of prayer, while the Vatican continues its careful, methodical investigation. A small chapel now stands near the lakeshore, built with local materials by the village. Inside, a painting depicts Our Lady of Turkana, as she has come to be known, standing on the waters of the Jade Sea, crocodiles retreating before her. Unlike traditional European images of Mary, this one shows her with dark skin, wearing a mixture of traditional Turkana beadwork and the blue mantle associated with Marian iconography. The chapel has become a pilgrimage site, not just for Christians but for people of various faiths drawn to the story of divine protection. The local economy has benefited from the modest tourism, allowing for improvements to the village school and clinic. More importantly, the event has created a unique blending of faith traditions, Catholic teaching and Turkana spirituality finding common ground in the reverence for a mother figure who protects her children. My leg healed. Though I walk with a slight limp that worsens during the rainy season, I consider it a gift, a physical reminder of both mortal danger and divine intervention. Sometimes standing on the chapel's small porch at sunset, watching the turquoise waters of the lake turn golden in the fading light, I find myself touching the scar and whispering thanks. In theological circles, debates continue about what happened that day. Was it a true Marian apparition? A collective spiritual experience shaped by cultural context? A psychological response to extreme stress? The Church, in her ancient wisdom, moves slowly in such matters, gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, considering alternative explanations. But here in Turkana, among the people who saw their priest facing death and witnessed something beyond natural explanation, there is no debate. The mother came to the waters. She protected her child. She claimed this harsh, beautiful land and its people as her own. I still serve in the same region, though my responsibilities have expanded to include overseeing the small but growing pilgrimage site. Visitors often ask me if I've seen her again, if the Virgin has returned to Lake Turkana since that day. The answer is both yes and no. I have not witnessed another apparition like the one that saved me from the crocodiles, but I see her presence daily in the changed lives around me, in the faith that flourishes in this once-forgotten corner of Kenya, in the peaceful coexistence of people who once viewed Christianity with suspicion. The waters of Lake Turkana continue to give life to this arid region. Fishermen still ply its depths, though now many of them wear rosary beads alongside their traditional amulets. The crocodiles remain, ancient predators doing what they were created to do. But there seems to be a new respect between human and reptile, a boundary established by events that transcend natural law. As for me, the bookish boy from Dublin who found his true purpose in the heat and dust of northern Kenya, I continue to learn what it means to be both Irish and Turkana, both scholar and missionary, both teacher and student. Each evening, as the stars appear over the lake with breathtaking clarity, I pray the rosary in 3 languages, English, Latin, and Turkana, feeling the connections between worlds that once seemed impossibly distant. Have you ever experienced a moment when the veil between heaven and earth seemed to thin? When something happened that defied explanation, but aligned perfectly with the deepest truths you've always known? That day on Lake Turkana was such a moment for me. A testament that faith isn't just about ancient texts and theological arguments, but about a living, active presence that intervenes in our world in ways both subtle and dramatic. If you ever find yourself in northern Kenya, seek out the small chapel by the jade waters of the lake. Sit quietly and listen to the stories the local people tell. Perhaps you'll feel it too, the gentle presence of a mother who crosses all boundaries to protect her children. And if you do, remember that miracles don't always come as we expect them. Sometimes they come with teeth and scales and ancient eyes, teaching us that divine protection doesn't always mean the absence of danger, but rather the presence of grace within it. And whether you believe my story or dismiss it as the sun-addled account of an Irish priest who spent too many years under the African sun, know this: faith matters most, not when it's easy, but when you're standing in dangerous waters, watching death approach, with nothing but a prayer on your lips and hope in your heart. Have you ever felt protected against impossible odds? Has the Mother of God, or whatever name you use for the feminine aspect of divine compassion, ever made her presence known in your life? Share your story, for it's in the sharing of these sacred moments that we build bridges between cultures, between faiths, between the visible and invisible realms that make up our complex human experience. The waters of Lake Turkana continue to glow turquoise under the African sun. The crocodiles continue their ancient patrol, and somewhere between danger and safety, between faith and doubt, between the mundane and the miraculous, our stories continue to unfold in ways that remind us we are never truly alone.